you're part of this with us on this network. 5 Live Drive.
Listen on BBC Sounds.
Claire and Gordon here, seeing you through until 7 o'clock. Now, LGBT veterans who are being awarded a special ribbon to mark the injustice they faced when it was illegal to be gay in the military say they'll refuse to wear it until the government pays them compensation. Representatives from the Army, Navy and RAF attended a ceremony in Westminster earlier. Our next guest, Royal Navy sailor Emma Riley, was one who received a ribbon to symbolise the injustice and abhorrent treatment faced by LGBT members of the armed forces prior to the ban being lifted on the 12th of January 2000. I'm pleased to say Emma joins us now. Good afternoon, Emma.
Good afternoon.
Great to have you on. Great to have you on. Now, the ribbon itself, it means a lot to you, doesn't it? But the compensation issue, I mean, how much of a difficult issue has that been for you to handle, given the significance of the ribbon itself?
I think for me, the ribbon is incredibly significant. I unfortunately was not allowed to stay in the Royal Navy long enough to be able to earn medals or ribbons or any sort of accomplishments as far as that was concerned. So this really is the only time I will ever get any kind of physical acknowledgement of my service to the country. And so it is incredibly special to me. And I do think that that is a lovely and good thing that the Ministry of Defence have done in response to the recommendations of reparations. The financial compensation is a difficult issue, and I do understand that that is hard for a new government to come into. However, Labour, when in opposition, were incredibly supportive to LGBT veterans on this particular point of compensation. So I do expect that the Labour government now will be putting into practice what they said in opposition.
Emma, before we talk about money, that vulgar subject of money, I think it's important, isn't it, to talk about what you've been through and the injustices and the treatment, before we even have that discussion about money. What were you on the receiving end of, just for anybody who's not been familiar with the story?
So my own story is actually one of the milder ones. I unfortunately mentioned to a person I thought was my friend that I thought I might be gay. And basically the next morning it was, knock on the door at 6 a.m, get up, get dressed, get downstairs, you're under arrest. And I went through police interviews, they searched stuff, they ostracized me, then they sent me home to tell my parents in a forced coming out. And then a few weeks later, they gave me a discharge shore and sent me home, closed the door on me, and I never had anything from them again. No support, no guidance, nothing whatsoever. But as I said, this is one of the easier stories. I've spoken to veterans since then that have had everything from electrical sort of psychological stimulation to bullying, rape, and being beaten up, being used as bait to try and trap other people, being psychologically evaluated and tortured effectively, mentally. And the scars that everybody lives with, even myself, I've lived with that kind of torment of shame and not feeling worthy of anything for years. I don't deal well with any kind of bullying or anything like that. I've taken decades to be able to feel comfortable enough and vulnerable enough to actually have a really open relationship with somebody. And as I said, that's one of the milder stories. I've seen people who have gone back into the closet for 30 years, who have had to cope with the fact that in their letters was another person's name. And even though they were themselves thrown out, the person that they then went after committed suicide because they couldn't live with the shame of being brought up against this ban. It's just destructive in every kind of sense of the way.
And Emma, we're not talking about 1927 here, are we? This is relatively recent history. I mean, your own particular case, when were we talking?
So I joined in 1990 and I was thrown out at the end of 1993. And even today, Carl, who was one of the other people who received it, he was thrown out in 1997. And these people were in prison. Stephen, the army representative, he was imprisoned at age 20 for 6 months and then went on the sex offenders register for kissing a guy for 30 years. 30 years. And he wasn't able to pursue any kind of other education. He couldn't get jobs. He's had a really terrible life as far as being able to work or support himself, and has nothing when he's coming up for retirement. And that's a case that is echoed across the veterans. Everything from families slamming the doors in their faces and being homeless and penniless across the ages. It's just so destructive what that ban did to us.
Emma, this is right at the heart of it, isn't it? Because many LGBT plus veterans lost homes, careers, and also it's the years of pensionable service that are at the heart of this as well. So how important is this for you to keep the stories in the public conscious, remind people what you've been through, before we get to that conversation on money?
It's very much important, because everybody who then speaks to their MP, who can then support us in their debates when they come to debate what they're going to do about the financial compensation, it's really helpful. We need MPs to be aware of the full horror of what we've been through, and recognise that what's currently in place as a recommendation, which is it sounds like a lot of money. £50 million sounds like an awful lot of money. But by the government's own understanding of how many veterans could apply, which is 4,000, you divide 50 million by 4,000 and each person would get £12,500.
So there we go.
You may as well not bother doing it at that level. It's such an insult.
And it's worth just pausing for a second on those figures, and after you've so articulately explained the horror, the pain and the suffering. So it's a £50 million pot, isn't it, for proposed reparations? As you say,
what they're saying.
4,000 applicants, and that does boil down to £12,500. So if you had to describe that offer, if it was placed to you today, what would you say it is? What does it amount to?
It's an insult to those who step forward in the service of their country. And it is a complete opposite to the Armed Forces Covenant, which is a promise from the state, from the nation, that every armed service person and veteran will always be looked after no matter what, because they have stepped forward in service of their country.
Yeah. And Emma, we're 30 years on now from your service, but how important is it to you personally to continue a fight for justice on exactly this subject?
It is incredibly important. I was one of the people who stepped forward to take my case to the European Court of Human Rights because it was so wrong. And I'm glad that I was able to lend my weight to those cases which were ruled upon in 1999. But I can't rest, and I certainly can't wear this lovely ribbon until all of the reparation recommendations have been put in place.
And Emma, just to finish, when will you put that ribbon? When will that appear on your uniform when you have a chance to wear it?
Well, I hope, given today and the conversations we were able to have with the Secretary of State for Defence and the Minister for Veterans and People, I hope that between them and both parties, all parties in fact, they have the conversations and get the recommendation implemented, or at least agreed upon without the cap, to be implemented by the time we get to the 25th anniversary of the lifting of the ban, which is next year on the 12th of January, 2025. I hope that they will be able to do that, and I challenge them to do so.
Emma Rowley, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks again for coming on and sharing your story. It's impressive stuff. So thank you for coming on.
And thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
There we go. Former Royal Navy sailor Emma Riley there, who is in the middle of a battle for some compensation after some pretty rough treatment from the armed forces.
26 minutes past 6 on 5 Live Drive. Let's